Okay, so apropos of questions that you were getting yesterday, may I ask you if the legion of internet users in North Korea should expect to face further disruptions in the coming days of their service?
Well, as I said yesterday, I can't speculate. I mean, ask the North Koreans if their internet wasn't working. I can't speculate on why that was if it wasn't. I can't confirm the reports that it actually wasn't. So I would check with them. They're certainly the right people to speak to this, and I don't have much more on this.
How exactly would you suggest we do that? Email? If their internet's down, I'm not sure that
you're an enterprising reporter, Matt. Well, I'm sure you can find some way. But it's not, I guess my point is it's not something for us to speak to. It's their internet, and I guess I
thought the internet was the world's.
Can I ask something more Can I ask on that particular point?
Your answer yesterday to this question, which I think Nicole raised, was interpreted by a lot of people to be a kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
And I wasn't indicating. I don't think I actually winked or nudged during that answer.
No, I'm saying it was interpreted.
I know, and what I said a couple things. I said I can't comment on those reports one way or the other. I can't confirm them one way or the other. I don't actually know that their internet was out, and it's not for me to speak to. I was broadly speaking about what the president has said, but in no way was trying to link it to yesterday's activity, and I understand it was sort of interpreted that way and did not mean to be.
Can I ask something more pointed, particularly about that? I mean, I think we're not asking you anymore, like, if the internet was shut down. It clearly seems that they've had some kind of interruption. So just point blank, was the U.S. involved in anything related to the internet shutting down in North Korea?
This isn't our internet, Elise. I would go ask the North Koreans.
Did the U.S. undertake any type of cyber operations that could have led to the North Korean internet being down?
I don't have any information to share with you about
So you're not saying absolutely not, you're not involved.
I think I'm not going to comment on those one way or the other, and I would caution you from assuming that means
I'm not assuming, I'm asking.
Can I finish before you interrupt me? Okay. Just because we're in this room doesn't mean we can all talk over each other. Look,
it wouldn't be interrupting if she let you finish.
I like that you do have to turn the mic on, though. No, what I'm saying is, look, I don't have anything new to share with you today about North Korea. The president has spoken to what our potential responses, separate and apart from what we've seen over the last 24 hours, might be. And I leave it to the North Koreans to talk about if their internet was up, if it wasn't, and why. We're just not going to entertain questions one way or the other about, any of these questions about, possible U.S. responses of any kind. And I would caution you from assuming that because I'm not going to comment on them, that the answer means one thing or the other.
I'm not assuming anything. I'm just
Your question sounded like you were.
No, it's not. It's just, obviously a lot of people are assuming, and I'm not in the business of assuming. Right. I'm in the business of asking you whether the U.S. was involved in this obvious shutdown of the North Korean internet.
I just don't think we're going to get into the business of every time something happens in a country like North Korea saying yes or no either way. I think that just sets a precedent that, quite frankly, is not a helpful one, and I just don't have more for you on this.
Go ahead.
The U.S. asked China last Thursday whether that were to help rein in Pyongyang. The one thing was to shut down any of the internet routers and servers. Number two, to tell Pyongyang that this was not okay, that this was taken seriously. And number three, to find the hackers, and if they are in China, to send them back to the north. As far as yesterday, China had not responded. What do you make from that, the fact that there's no response to this?
Well, the secretary spoke with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, as I said yesterday. He spoke with him on Sunday to discuss the recent cyber attack, among other issues as well, in order to express our concerns and ask for their cooperation. They had a discussion about the issue, and I think despite our differences, affirmed that sort of malicious cyber activity like this can pose a risk to international peace and security. I'm not going to, I think, further outline our conversations. They continue about how we can work together on this issue. So it's not like it's a binary yes or no, help or not. It's an ongoing conversation. China does have, of course, a unique relationship with North Korea on a whole range of issues, right? We've talked about this in terms of denuclearization, but they certainly have a key role to play here, and we'll continue talking to the Chinese about how they can actually help.
Did the secretary actually get an answer from his counterpart saying they would look into it?
Well, it was certainly a discussion, and I just don't have more details about their private conversation to share.
And
And also on this one, is the US happy with Japan's response? Japan has said, basically has condemned this strongly, but that it hasn't gone as far as actually saying that it was North Korea.
Well, given this was a U.S. company, the FBI did the investigation. We are confident in their investigation and the results of it. But we also welcome any country, particularly in the region, standing up and saying this is not acceptable behavior, and certainly welcome those statements.
And one last one. Overnight, in a press briefing in Beijing, the Chinese said that if you want to resolve this, you need to speak directly to the North Koreans. Any response to that?
Well, I think when the President of the United States stands up in a press conference and speaks publicly about this, that's a pretty direct message to the North Koreans. But as you all know, we also have a variety of ways of communicating with the North Koreans.
Sony Pictures Entertainment may be an American company, but its name, Sony, is, I mean, Japanese.
Yes.
Would you not expect a stronger response from the Japanese,
I
considering
think,
the history here?
You know, I haven't heard any issues with those kinds of
All right.
responses.
And then you said that the Secretary in his conversation with the Chinese Foreign Minister said that malicious cyber activity like this
can pose a risk.
can
to
pose a
international
risk.
peace and
Is it
security.
view of the U.S. government that this hack on Sony, as bad as it was, could undermine international peace and security?
Well, it's this kind of.
But not this specific one necessarily.
Well, I mean, the President has spoken to what he thinks this was, right? Cyber vandalism is a word that's been used.
Right.
But certainly, situations like this have the potential to further escalate tensions, right? And that's why yesterday, when I was asked about North Korea, one of the things I said was we actually want them to reduce tensions. That we want them to, come back from the brink, reduce tensions here, and not take escalatory steps. But these things, have the potential, which is the opposite of what we want to see happen.
Okay, and then were you able to get answers to the two questions that I had pending? One on the state sponsors redesignation, if it would actually put any more sanctions on North Korea, and then secondly, if in fact the North Koreans were to take you up on your advice to take responsibility and pay compensation, would Sony actually be able to accept money from the North Korean government?
So on the second question, I don't have a specific legal answer for you. As I said yesterday, I'm sure we could find some way to make that happen, but I don't have a legal answer for you. On this first one, it's a little complicated, but let me walk you through what I have been told by all the various people who've worked on this. That, as I said yesterday, despite the rescinding of the SST designation, they are one of the most heavily sanctioned countries on earth. The underlying sanctions regime did change, so as a matter of law, the SST restrictions no longer applied when they were taken off. The main categories of restrictions, so that includes a ban on arms-related exports and sales, controls over exports of dual-use items, restrictions on foreign assistance, and certain blocking financial sanctions associated with being on the list remain in place under other sanctions authorities. So our experts are combing through to see if there's anything that did come off, but the main categories did not, because they were associated with other sets of sanctions. We can't say there's an exact equivalence, right? Our folks are looking at that right now. There's obviously a lot of sanctions to comb through, but the bottom line is that there would not be a huge practical effect from a sanction standpoint if they were put back on. Obviously, it's symbolic, and there may be some sanctions effect, but it wouldn't be huge.
But if the president said that it's not an act of war, and I mean, it doesn't seem like he's saying it's an act of terrorism either, how can you even suggest that North Korea would be put back on the list, because you're not considering this an act of terrorism? Wouldn't the North Koreans have to actually undertake an act of terrorism before you would have to put them back on the list?
Well, there's specific criteria to be put back on the list, one of which is not undertaking an act of war. Obviously, there's a process for this. As a matter of law, in order for any country to be designated, the Secretary must determine the government of that country has repeatedly provided support for acts of international terrorism. There's a process, and I'm not saying this would fall under that category. The President wasn't saying that. He was saying that in light of some of North Korea's recent activity, we are looking at it, but we don't want to prejudge the outcome, and this may not be the best way to respond.
Sorry, putting them back on the
It
list
may
might
not be,
be.
but it may. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of a conversation.
Can I?
Understood. Let me just wait. I just want to make sure that I understand exactly what it is you're saying.
You and me both.
Yeah, that would be good. If they were added back onto the list, there wouldn't be any significant or substantial additional sanctions imposed or put back on.
So
Is that correct? I mean, there might be something
Our
small.
folks are still looking at it. There would not be a huge practical effect, though there are some SST-specific restrictions that would apply again, such as state sponsors of terrorism are not immune from jurisdiction of state and federal courts for damages being sought against them for certain acts, right? So there are a couple, and our folks are combing through this, and I know this is not a wholly satisfactory answer. It wouldn't have a huge practical effect when it comes to sanctions, but there are some things, and I'm trying to get a list of what those are, that in fact would go back into effect.
Are you saying that North Korea right now enjoys that immunity because it's not on the list?
Our folks are that's exactly the issue they're looking into. And you can imagine there
Or in terms
are
of
thousands of sanctions in place on North Korea. They're combing through them to see
and in terms
what
of
was on
diplomats'
before and what
travel and that kind of thing, in terms of in terms of the limits on their travel in the United States around New York.
Does that affect it?
I don't know.
I don't
That's
either.
why
I'll check.
Okay.
I'm not sure it does. I mean, a lot of the travel restrictions are part of other sanctions. It's complicated, and we are attempting to get more info. Yes,
Can I go
please.
back to the whole idea of the discussions that, I know that they were very kind of surface discussions that Danny Russell had with Sony and that Robert Knight had of consultants to the film. What's that?
King, not
King.
Knight.
King,
Sorry.
not Knight. You demoted
Sorry.
it.
And I wouldn't
Sorry.
say consulting on the film. They had discussions with the filmmakers.
No, I didn't say that. I
You
said he
said
did. I said
consulting.
he had discussions with a consultant
Ah, okay.
on the film. Sorry.
It's okay.
You know, didn't at the time when you heard about what this film was about think, I mean, I'm not in any way justifying what happened if the North Koreans were indeed responsible. But, I mean, didn't at the time this raise any red flags that, you know, given what you know about the regime and given what you know about how unstable and unpredictable it is, that this would raise some red flags?
Well, again, not being involved in that process, I think a few points. The first is that they came to us asking for our subject matter expertise on North Korea. That's not an assessment that we can make as the State Department. That's an artistic assessment that artists have to make when they make all kinds of films, documentaries. There have been many made about North Korea, documentaries in the United States. So that's not our position to give analysis about what the response of the North Korean government might be. We certainly have expertise, but that's not really our role. And I think the president spoke pretty eloquently to this in his end-of-year press conference when he said, this is a Seth Rogen movie. Like, I'm not certainly in the business of predicting how the North Koreans will respond to anything. I don't think I'd ever want to get into that business, but, who knows? Who could have predicted this would be the response? And I just guess I don't want to go too much farther down that road.
I'm not saying that, you could have predicted this specific response, but if the Russians, for say, or some other, country that you're having problems with would have done a movie about the assassination of President Obama, wouldn't you have severe objections to that and think that that would send a dangerous message and that perhaps that could, inspire, any crazy to go out there and follow this movie?
Well, to be clear, there are horrible things written and said and made about this president and this Secretary of State in the United States and elsewhere, and while we hate them and we'll speak up against them, we also speak up for the right of people to freely express their opinions, even if we think they're repugnant. So that's the response you have. You can stand up here and say, we respect your right to do this, but we disagree with it wholeheartedly, the message. That's something very...
I didn't hear you say that you disagreed wholeheartedly with that message, that kind of endorsed the assassination
I'm
of a
speaking
leader
to
of another
your
country.
question if someone made a movie about us.
Right.
I was answering that question. I'm not taking a stance on the Sony movie one way or the other, the content of it, but you were asking the question, if someone around the world made a movie like this, people around the world in the U.S. say horrible things about my boss, the president, and they have the right to do that. We can hate it, but you don't respond by undertaking a massive malicious cyber attack.
But I mean,
because we believe in people's right to be able to freely express themselves, even when those ideas are horribly repugnant.
I understand, but again, without kind of endorsing what happened, I mean, can't you see that in some way that the regime sees this as the United States kind of under, with a desire for regime change? I mean, given
No.
given
It's a
how
Seth Rogen movie.
you're saying that, and everyone in this country knows that Seth Rogen is a comedian and all of that, but when you have this regime that's kind of in the dark ages and doesn't know much about what's going on in the world, when they see a movie coming from the United States and this leader, already is paranoid and feels threatened, don't you think that that would kind of further his paranoia?
It would in no way justify the response that we saw here, at all, period. Yes.
Can I just ask you to clarify something? You said that people in this country and around the world say horrible things about your boss and others, and then you
And
said,
me,
and
you
you,
go on
right.
Twitter,
Right,
it's not a kind place.
and you said, right, but you said we hate them. Were you referring to
Those ideas.
the people? Okay.
No, not the people. Of course, we hate those ideas. I was
Gotcha.
not referring to specific individuals. I
Gotcha.
don't know most of them. It's the beauty of the internet. Yes, Elliot.
I just wanted to get back to the issue of the U.S. response. Since you just said that relisting them on the state-sanctioned.
Your mic's not on.
You just said that relisting them on the state-sponsored terrorism list would not have much of a practical impact.
On sanctions, but our folks are still looking at that. But
Sure,
it obviously
sure.
has a hugely symbolic one. There aren't that many in the world.
Sure. But the U.S. has been clear that it will respond, and like you said, some of them will be unseen, some of them will be seen. But staying
Absolutely.
just in the realm of the scene, what other responses are there that could have an impact, given that piling more sanctions on probably would have diminishing returns?
Well,
at
there's a
this point?
range of options. I don't think I want to put anything on the table or off the table at this point, but that's, there are obviously financial options. But again, I'm not ruling anything in or out from a policy perspective. There are a range of both seen and unseen options that we have, though. And if we ever have, anything to outline publicly, we will do so. Yes. Turn your mic on, please. Sorry, I can't hear.
Yesterday, when you talk about the U.S. implement the response to North Korea, some will be seen, some may not be seen. Would that include interrupt North Korea internet?
We're just not going to outline what the possible steps may be, and I think it is probably common sense that if some steps could be unseen, we're also not going to outline those publicly.
And in terms of the conversation, the secretary with the Chinese foreign minister, can you say China is on the same page with the United States in terms of the attack for North Korea on Sony?
Well, I don't want to speak for the Chinese government, obviously, and despite our differences at times over issues, particularly in the cyber world, I think what came out of the phone call the secretary had was that they both affirmed, as I said to Matt, that this kind of activity could threaten international peace and security, and they'll continue the conversation about how to coordinate. But I don't want to speak for them or for their position.
Can I ask one more thing about those unforeseen consequences? If they're unforeseen and the North Koreans don't know that you did it, then why is it a response that would make a difference to them?
Well, hypothetically, Elise, if something is unforeseen to the public, it doesn't mean it's unseen. Thank you, Matt. That doesn't necessarily mean it's unseen to everyone.
So
hypothetically speaking.
So hypothetically speaking, if there's an action that you're not going to tell the public about, you're going to tell the North Koreans, yeah, it was us?
No, come on, this is a ridiculous line of questioning. There are things we could do to respond that may not be seen publicly, but that could be seen by those affected.
But
In
they
a
wouldn't.
total hypothetical universe here.
But
Just
if
use
they
your
don't know
imagination.
that, but if they don't know that it's you, why is it a response that they would
But
feel?
why are you assuming they wouldn't?
Well, if it's not foreseen to the public, then why would it be foreseen to the North Koreans?
That's a fairly common sense question to answer, at least. Obviously, there are sometimes things seen to other governments that aren't seen publicly.
Well, if you did something to the
I'm
North,
not sure what's confusing about that answer.
if you did something to the North Koreans and it wasn't foreseen to the public, but they knew about it, you don't think they would say something publicly about it?
This is a completely hypothetical discussion. I'm just not going to go down this road. The president has said we will respond in a proportional way. Some of that might be seen, some of that might be unseen. Nothing to preview, nothing to talk about, nothing to put on the table, off the table. There are a range of options the United States has to respond, and I'm just not going to entertain those kinds of detailed questions. Anything else on North Korea? Yes. Can you turn on your mic, please?
Sure. A former U.S. official says a much more powerful retaliatory and deterrent signal would be an effort to provide internet access to North Koreans. What do you think of that?
There are a lot of ideas out there. I'm happy for people to write about them publicly. We have a range of options. I'm not going to rule anything in or anything
Is it
out.
practical at all?
I'm not a cyber expert, and I'm just not going to go down that road, guys. If we have something at some point to talk about publicly about response, I am sure we will.